Hey, thanks for joining. I'm Roberto Varese at the GFCC. I'm happy to have here today with me Ganesh Rasagam from the World Bank. Ganesh, thanks a lot for joining.
Thank you, Roberto.
Yeah. So Ganesh is a senior manager at the Global Competitiveness and Trade Practice at the World Bank, and you basically are in charge of running initiatives related to innovation and entrepreneurship under the competitiveness framework.
Yes.
Yeah. So where's the rationale for that? What's the nexus that you see, and how do you work in terms of connecting competitiveness promotion, innovation, and entrepreneurship, Ganesh?
Thank you, Roberto. It's a great question. And first of all, let me thank you for this opportunity to be here to speak to you and for inviting me to this discussion. So let me go back to the World Bank's agenda, the twin goals, which is shared prosperity and reducing poverty. And the trade and competitiveness agenda is central to that in terms of creating more jobs and better quality jobs to increase incomes, to lift people out of poverty, and also to reduce the inequalities in society. So that is sort of the framework through which I would like to present the agenda of innovation and growth. So let me just take innovation first. So innovation-driven growth is the new mantra. So what does that mean? New products, new processes, new ways of delivering services, especially to the underserved segments of populations. That we believe is the way to drive growth and reduce poverty.
And create value.
And create value, exactly. So if you look at it from that perspective, then the competitiveness agenda is about getting firms to be more productive and to increase value, to create more jobs, better quality jobs, and so it's linked to the productivity agenda. So firms that innovate, and not necessarily innovate meaning innovate in a vacuum to create brand new ideas and products. That'll be great, but that'll be great to do that. But also firms that adapt and copy and modify technologies from other parts of the world in order to deliver services in the country in which they are operating. I think that sort of innovation is also equally important to increase productivity of firms. The entrepreneurship agenda is part of the innovation agenda in the sense that you want to create the enabling environment for new entrants to come into the space, to bring their ideas and to help them to take these ideas to market. So the entrepreneurship agenda is where we would like to see where we see it as creating the pipeline of investors, of firms that could eventually grow and innovate and become larger firms, or even stay small and be productive and be efficient. So that's the way this three bits come together in my mind.
Okay. And what do you do in terms of what's part of your action agenda today at the World Bank in that space?
Great. So if I can capture in terms of three buckets, the first bucket is in knowledge and experience sharing. The second is in terms of operational support, and the third is in terms of partnerships.
Okay.
So let me take the knowledge agenda first. The knowledge agenda is where I think the World Bank has added value, in the sense that we can bring experiences and knowledge in the space of innovation and entrepreneurship from one country to the other. To another, and bring the practitioners to speak to each other. So, for example, we have what we've done before is taken policymakers from Africa, to be specific, from Mozambique, who are interested to learn from the experience of Startup Chile.
Okay.
And so that was a fascinating experience for the Mozambicans as well as for the Chileans, because for them they saw business opportunities in Mozambique which they had not sort of seen before. So it's a sort of partnership in terms of experience exchange and knowledge sharing that we would like to do more of. The second area of knowledge sharing is in looking at the new thinking in innovation and entrepreneurship. For example, how do we measure innovation at firm level? There are various ways of measuring that, data sets to look at. So we're looking at new ways of measuring innovation, of benchmarking innovation performance. We're looking at entrepreneurship, the agenda of entrepreneurship from the perspective of growth entrepreneurship. So how do you identify growth entrepreneurs? How do you support growth entrepreneurs? What have countries done successfully? What has Israel done to nurture startups that provide lessons? Exactly. For India, for example, who are keen to get to do more in startups. So that sort of knowledge generation, curation, and then dissemination is a really important part of what we do. The second part is on operational support. Is here we have innovation related support that we provide to governments in terms of improving the ecosystem for innovation and entrepreneurship.
At the policy level.
At the policy level. So it's policy and regulatory level interventions that we support. Institutional level to enhance the delivery capabilities of public institutions that are working in this space, to link academia, research institutions better to the needs of investors and private entrepreneurs. Essentially to address gaps in the innovation ecosystem in terms of infrastructure, policies, regulatory systems, and institutions. So that's one kind of support we do. The other is we actually are supporting testing and piloting of new business models in business incubation, in business acceleration. And this is in three thematic areas: in clean technology, in agribusiness, and in digital entrepreneurship. And we are supporting a number of these incubators, a number in Africa, a couple in Asia, Latin America, and so on. So that's the other area of work we do in terms of direct operational support. The third area is partnerships, which are really important. So here's partnerships with people like yourselves. How can we partner better with other stakeholders in this area? We're not the only ones in this space in terms of exchanging experiences and learning from each other in terms of joint knowledge events and so on.
There are lots of transformations in the innovation space in terms of, in the one hand, there are technologies that are emerging and becoming cheaper and cheaper every day. And at the same time, there are new models for innovation to happen or to take place in some way. And that goes both at the firm level, the company level. So corporations have been experimenting with that. And you see things like, let's say, corporations building their own accelerators or partnering with accelerators, etc. But also at the policy level, more and more there's a discussion how those new things could be incorporated in policy frameworks. What do you see as maybe, or what would you highlight as some of the examples that you've been seeing around the globe that are things that maybe we could have a look at in terms of learning from new things that are happening or that in some way are catching or interesting?
All right. I mean, this is a great question, because this is a sort of question that we grapple with all the time. Because there are a couple of principles that I can sort of highlight. One is that we find that taking an example of business model from country A and taking it to country B does not really work directly. So it's a question of adapting it and customizing it to the specific needs of that particular country, right? So if I were to take business models, for example, in green business, they're very successful models that have been developed in the US and in some countries in Europe, and now we are trying to do that in Vietnam. Now the whole context in Vietnam is very different, because firstly, the domestic private sector in Vietnam is fairly small. The state has a huge role in the private sector in Vietnam, and there's very little that you can do without involving the state in one form or the other. So we are trying to establish this consortium of stakeholders, state, private sector, academia, and it's been challenging just to bring them all around a shared agenda. So it takes more time to essentially get going, to just get everybody around the table to agree on a business model. And secondly, you have to there's also quite a bit of work to be done in terms of bringing the local entrepreneurs up to a stage where they understand what are the services that the state can provide and how they can benefit from those services, right? There's like, let's say, a need for trust building.
Okay,
now,
and also for the upgrade of capabilities.
And upgraded capabilities of both the public and private sector stakeholders. So that requires time and experimentation and so forth, right? So that's an example. Now, the other thing that I wanted to highlight is the role of public-private partnerships in this process, right? So often we find that entrepreneurs in many of the developing countries do not really they work in a vacuum. I mean, they don't really talk to each other. They don't really trust each other. There's a competition for ideas and markets. So to bring them around and organize them and to create this appreciation for the value of networking takes time. But it's really important, because then once you realize that, then you find that builds its own momentum and so forth. So one is to link the entrepreneurs to each other, and then to link them to state players. So it's a two-step process. So example, in Kenya, we've done it quite successfully with this mobile lab concepts, where it's a space for digital entrepreneurs to come together and share, and that's taken off fantastically.
Like let's say a co-working or a hub.
Exactly, okay. Like a hub for tech entrepreneurs, to come together to exchange ideas, and that. So is to have these small pilots demonstrate the effectiveness of these models before we can scale up.
Okay.
So that's the other example.
You mentioned green technologies or clean technologies. Yeah, and that is related to, for sure, lots of areas, from goods or consumer goods to, let's say, infrastructure.
Right.
You will be in Saudi Arabia at the King Abdullah Economic City with us, and we're really happy, excited about that. And the conversation there will be around infrastructure.
Right.
But considering that for different lenses, let's say, in the one hand, the lack of infrastructures create costs economy-wide,
right,
like in many emerging countries. At the same time, investments in infrastructure have the potential to promote innovation or to leverage new technologies and the creation of new businesses.
Right.
Yeah. What's your take on the opportunities to connect investments in infrastructure from sanitation, water, transportation, housing, whatever,
right,
and innovation, especially not just limited to that, but maybe especially in emerging markets, as you mentioned some of the experiences in that space.
Right. So I think there are a couple of areas where I think there are tremendous opportunities. I think one is, of course, in the concept of green buildings and linked to resource usage, right? So we're looking at design of buildings that minimize energy consumption, water consumption, and digital technology to monitor and regulate consumption of water and energy. So that's an area where we're helping governments with regulatory environment for green buildings. And that has tremendous potential. I mean, to give an example, in Indonesia, they have passed new regulations for green buildings compliance. And so, in terms of just refurbishing buildings, retrofitting buildings, I mean, that's
the whole
country.
Yeah.
So almost city by city,
like incentives
and compliance requirements and so on. I mean, just the business opportunities coming out from that.
That kind of discussion is growing around the globe.
Exactly.
I was reading the other day, and so I came from Brazil, but just by coincidence, I was reading the mayor of São Paulo is proposing tax cuts for green buildings.
Right. Absolutely.
Sustainable buildings.
So the incentives are there, and then the business opportunities coming out from those from those regulations and the compliance requirements. So that's clearly an area where there's huge growth potential. The other is in the planning of new infrastructure, and just using digital technology for planning, big data, for example, for urban planning, right? So that changes the whole way of how we designed living spaces, shared spaces, infrastructure, common infrastructure for cities, a whole new paradigm shift. So there, again, tremendous opportunities in terms of using new technology for well, one is design, also is in maintenance of infrastructure, for example, for efficient use of public spaces, and so forth, right? So that's a whole big area of research. There's a whole big, huge opportunities there. The third area is in material technology. I mean, that's an area, nanotechnology, for example. There, I think there are potentially huge cost savings in minimizing construction materials, lighter materials, which again changes the whole way we design infrastructure and so forth. So it's a very exciting area. I think a lot of research is taking place in these spaces. The compliance with climate change, the challenges of climate change, I think that's going to be the driving force for some of this research taking place now. Even for coastal cities, for example, how do you deal with rising water levels? How do you redesign your drainage networks? And
40% of the world population live in, let's say, 100 kilometers away from the sea.
Absolutely.
It's a really concrete issue.
It's a concrete issue.
Yeah, really.
So, no, it's so if you look at, I mean, just mind-boggling. The challenges are mind-boggling, but the opportunities also, I think, are there.
Yeah. That's great. And in terms of policy frameworks, just a final question.
Sure.
Both in relation to the things that you are doing and that the World Bank's doing in that space, but also maybe some examples of things that you've been seeing around the globe.
Right.
Because opportunities are great, there are big challenges and great opportunities, as you said. But connecting those things is not an easy task always. It's a matter, you need frameworks, on policy frameworks to do that. How do you see that evolving today? And maybe some of the examples, but also the challenges, and how do you see policy frameworks to really materialize those connections today? Okay,
so let me try and answer this in a slightly different way. If I've looked at SME policies of a few countries recently, very sort of diverse countries, right? I looked at SME, the new SME strategy for, say, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, and Turkey, just to give you 3 examples. And what I find fascinating is that all of them have placed a huge focus on innovation and entrepreneurship as driving the SME agenda. Now, if you look at it, say, 10 years ago, it was all about public support for small enterprises, how do you it's about subsidized business development services. You define a firm by size, and then if you fall within a certain size of employment or turnover, you get a bunch of goodies from the state, right? It's a one-size-fit-all approach. Now that's become more nuanced now. Now I think the policy now is to look at the life cycle of firms, from pre-startup to startup to early stage growth to take off, and how do you differentiate the kind of support that the firms need in terms of access to finance, in terms of regulatory reforms, incentives, skills, and so forth. How you differentiate that, and how do you then customize the support? So I think that sort of thinking now has become mainstream in policy support for firms to grow. So that's one area of policy change I see. The second area is a thematic sort of focus on climate technology, on digital technology, and so forth. I think that's manufacturing, new manufacturing technologies. So that's kind of a sector focus as well. That's the other area that's increasingly becoming mainstream. I think government's also conscious of what are they getting in terms of spending, public spending on supporting innovation or entrepreneurship, right? Because the ways to measure impact of public spending on any innovation. I think that's something interesting that we are doing in some countries, like a public expenditure review on innovation spending. So impact evaluation methodologies, and how do you then from the lessons that you are picking up from review of this spending, then how do you then shift your policy? How do you put money into things that are working well to scale up, and shift funding from things that are not really showing impact? And that sort of thinking now is becoming more mainstream in terms of rationalizing expenditure on spending. The fourth thing is, how do you bring the public-private partnership more effectively together, right? So this is a big debate about innovation spending. Should firms be subsidized? What's the public good?
In which stage?
Exactly. I think there's lots of debate out there, but clearly there's a role for public sector investments in innovation, and then, as I said earlier, some of the largest firms today that you see, the successful tech firms, they all benefited from some sort of public spending in the history. So there's clearly a role for both. But what's the most effective way of putting it together varies from country to country and depends on national circumstances and so on.
Ganesh, thank you so much for your insights, your ideas. This will be continued in 2 weeks from now in Saudi Arabia in the GFCC annual meeting. Thanks for joining. Stay tuned.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Roberto. Looking forward to seeing you in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. Thanks, Ganesh.
Okay.
It was great.